Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this event, Afrocentricity, Humanity, and the Transforming of the Discourse Around Race, with Dr. Jeanette R. Davidson, Dr. Na Dove, and Dr. Malefi Keti Ashante. It's really great to be here today with the four of you, the three of you. So just to start off, I'm just going to give everyone a little bit of context about this event, which is being held this year as a part of Scotland's Black History Month programme. So we owe the concept of Black History Month to the son of former enslaved people, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, an African-American scholar who noted that American history books largely ignored the Black American population. The UK has a very different history of migration and diversity, and although there are clear parallels in the need to illuminate hidden histories in the UK and the US, there was also a need for an approach that fits the UK context. The first UK Black History Month was launched in October 1987 by the Greater London Council, thanks to the efforts of the Ethnic Minorities Unit staff. And in Scotland, we follow a similar model. We at CRER, which is the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights, have coordinated a collaborative and uniquely Scottish Black History Month during October since 2001. Black History Month encompasses the history of African, Caribbean, and Asian people in this country, people who often have a direct link with Scotland through slavery, colonialism, and migration. Black History Month focuses on the people whose sacrifices, contributions, and achievements against a backdrop of racism, inequality, and injustice are often forgotten about. We also know that 1 month is not enough, and we're campaigning to change this every month of the year. So now I'm going to pass over to Dr. Jeanette R. Davidson to kick us off.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, that should cover it. Thank you for your welcome and your greetings, Amy. I want to pause just for a minute, if you'll indulge me. I want to start by saying that may we wish and pray fervently for peace and comfort to all who are suffering in this very troubled world today. I feel very conscious of just how privileged we are to be able to take the time to have a lovely event like this while others cannot. May love and peace and compassion prevail, and may we all work towards it. I'm Professor Jeanette Davidson from the University of Texas, where I'm the director of the Moritz Center for Societal Impact in the Steve Hicks School of Social Work, and I'm Professor Emerita from the University of Oklahoma. As a member of the board of the National Council for Black Studies and chair of the International Committee, I'm delighted to also welcome you to our session. Thank you to our colleagues in Scotland, I should say my home country, for what has become a lovely working partnership with NCBS. Today we have two spectacular speakers whom I'll introduce just in a few minutes. First, however, we have a short video message made by NCBS board members, Dr. Alicia Fontenette, who's here with us today, and thank you for all of your work on today's program, and Dr. Ify Flannery. Dr. Fontenette is Assistant Professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware and the newly appointed Executive Director of the National Council for Black Studies. Her scholarship focuses on freedom and liberatory practices in K-12 education and the decolonization of oppressive practices in the classroom throughout the diaspora. Dr. Flannery is Assistant Professor at Temple University in Africology and African American Studies, and her scholarship focuses on tracing African cultural practices and beliefs practiced in the African diaspora. Now, the last time that we had a program with Black History Month in Scotland, Dr. Dee Shabazz was instrumental in creating that video. Dr. Shabazz, the beloved partner of Dr. Amilcar Shabazz, passed away recently, and we miss her terribly. We're thankful for her joyful life of service in pursuit of social justice for all people and dedicate today's session in her name. Ashe. Now, if we could have the video, please, Dr. Fontenette.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Alicia Fontenette, and I am an assistant professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware in Newark, Delaware, United States of America. I currently serve as the executive director of the National Council for Black Studies, and I also serve as its membership chairperson.
Greetings and welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Ife Tayo Flannery. I'm an assistant professor of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University in Philadelphia, PA, United States of America. I'm also a proud board member of NCBS and a member of our International Outreach Committee.
In 1975, the National Council for Black Studies was created to expand and strengthen academic units and community programs to formalize and normalize the study and discussion of the African world experience.
And as we continue these efforts of expansion, we are so glad to have you here today in solidarity with raising awareness around all the social, political, and intellectual issues that are affecting the African world community. We invite you today not just to participate, but to continue your relationships with NCBS.
National Council for Black Studies wants you to know, Scotland, we are in solidarity with you, and we look forward to engaging in your program of events. Everyone, please enjoy.
Now, as we get started, let me say briefly that while our two speakers are presenting, you're invited to put questions in the Q&A feature or in the chat. And at the conclusion of the talks, Amy and Alicia will present the questions to Dr. Dove and Dr. Asante. When you submit your questions, please indicate to whom the question is addressed, or if it is for both speakers. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our esteemed speakers today. Dr. Asante and Dr. Dove both come to us from Temple University's Department of Africology and African American Studies, where Professor Asante created the first ever doctoral program in our discipline. Let me just say, just to start off right, everything Dr. Asante does is groundbreaking. Dr. Asante is, as I think you all know, a transformative scholar. He's one of a kind with an international reputation. He's published over 100 books. Let me just pause so that just sinks in. Over 100 books, has given keynote addresses all over the world, and has taught and mentored many of our leading scholars today. Dr. Dove, too, is a remarkable scholar. She's creative and inspiring, and has given us seminal works about African mothers as bearers of culture and makers of social change, and about the Afrocentric school. Dr. Asante and Dove are going to speak about Afrocentricity, humanity, and the transforming of the discourse around race, based on their book published in 2021. This book, Being Human Being, has been critically acclaimed, not least by another of our NCBS colleagues, one of Dr. Asante's former students, known to you as the brilliant author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, Dr. Ibram Kendi. I could say so much more. I want to say so much more, but I think that it's time to just, let's get this show on the road. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Dr. Asante and Dr. Dove, and thank you. We are absolutely honored that you could be with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Davidson, and also Dr. Fontenette, and also the Scotland Black History Month Committee and Association. We are delighted that Amy Rich has been here to get us started, and we're really pleased to be here. I'm honored, as always, to be with my colleague, Dr. Na Dove, who in many ways, many respects, is the key to our department's work on African womanism, as well as our work on the two cradle theory of Sheikh Anta Diop. She is in her own right a brilliant scholar with the book African Mothers and the book Afrocentric School, as well as the book that we have written, Being Human Being. We decided that what we would do is talk maybe 10 to 15 minutes apiece, and then afterwards just have questions and answers to make sure that we make a good time in the hour and 15 or 20 minutes that we have. Let me start by saying that Afrocentricity and humanity go together. That unfortunately, over the years, since I first wrote the book, Afrocentricity in 1980, when it was first published in 1980, I'd written it in 1978 and 79. It was published in 1980. The aim of that book was to center the discussion of African people on the notion that we were agents of history, and we were not just on the margins of Europe, that we ourselves were actors, that we were individuals and collectivities that were engaged in human history, and that you could not just simply think of Africa or Africans as people who went along on the boat ride, but did not have any thoughts of our own. Of course we did. And of course we were always acting, and we were always concerned about agency. But of course that agency was reduced. And it was not only reduced, sometimes it was rejected, and many times it was erased. So this book that we have written, Being Human Being, starts from the premise that the origin of Homo sapiens is Africa, that all of us, in a way, derive from the continent of Africa, that there is, in fact, only one race, the human race. Now, that's a very powerful statement, but it's a factual statement. We all have DNA that comes from one African woman who lived nearly 300,000 years ago in Africa. So that is a fundamental fact. The problem becomes with the invention of these various categories and classifications that have in effect created a notion of hierarchy and patriarchy. And I said a notion, it's a scripto, I call it, as Sylvia Winter once called it, a scripto-biological notion of hierarchy. And it appears, unfortunately, in just a few cultures. It doesn't appear in all of them, but those few, it's unfortunate that it appears in those few. And one of the biggest, of course, is the Western capitalist global seizure of land and labor of people from around the world, because what that has meant is that there is a seizure also of information. There is an introduction in the world of the racial, what I call the racial ladder, which we have both talked about, Dr. Dove and I, that the ideas, the icons, the images that engender the maintenance of patriarchy and the maintenance of hierarchy, and the practice of this hierarchy are found in the Western Eurocentric perspective of the world. Afrocentricity is a critique of that. It is a critique of domination. It is a critique of patriarchy. And by critiquing it, it means that we say that there's something else in the world other than that. And we know that if we are human beings, we are nothing as humans if we do not have or do not engage in the constant process of making humanity. That is our key. And so I just want to leave a couple of more comments, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Dove. Eduardo Galeano's book, the open veins of Latin America, talked about the stampede of Eurocentric domination of the native peoples of the Americas. And if you go throughout South America, Central America, you see this. I mean, Brazil, of course, is a very good, massive example of that. What has happened to the culture of the indigenous people, the First Nations. But it's also happened not just in Brazil, it happened in Australia. It happened in North America as well. And by doing this, and the creation of the racial ladder at the same time, what it did was, as Tommy Curry has said in his book, The Man Not, Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemma of Black Manhood, that it challenged, that there is a challenge to the humanity of African people. And this, what we have to do is challenge the negation of Black people, Black men and women, by showing that we have, that our image and our work and our humanity has been distorted by race perceptions. And so we attack this question of race. We see it as a part of the creation of ranking, and the ranking of people based on this ascripto biological notion is one of the worst things that happened to humanity. And it is out of the European experience that we get this, because Africa, for example, always knew that human beings were different, but difference did not mean that you had to rank the difference, you see? And what Europe did was to rank difference. If you had a certain color of eyes, a certain complexion, you rank those. And by ranking human beings, you create this notion that they had around, I mean, race became the definition of that. And that, of course, is one of the problems that we find. We cannot be human and still negate humanity and negate humans. And so that's one of our big takeaways in the book. And the final thing I want to say is that the Human Project is found on optimism, which is the same as Afrocentricity. The aim of Afrocentricity is that it is useful for all humanity to arrive at what Dr. Dove has often called ma'aticity. That is the acquiring of ma'at in our lives and in our beings and in our practices. And we go all the way back to Imhotep, the first multidimensional human, and to the pyramid, the first textual document in history. And we start from there, and we began to see what has happened to the rest of the world. I just want to stop here and then turn it over to Dr. Dove.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asante. It's an honor to work with you, to be in your department, to have been able to become an Africologist myself in the discipline. And I was very happy, honored when you asked if I would write this book with you. And so, and I think much of it was initiated by the death of George Floyd at the time, and the open murder of George Floyd, which became a global interest, although there were certain cultural groups who did not participate in showing their demands against this horror. But anyway, I digress. I have tried to, we've really relied in Africology on Job's cradle theory, because we wanted to become very clear about culture, so that we could move out of the race paradigm, because once we understood that race was actually a cultural construction. I know, people often term it a social construction, but the point and disadvantage of that is that when did it begin and when does it end? It's something common to all humans from that vantage, so we can all are racist in certain ways, and we may decide not to be, or we may remain racist. But when we look at the cultural history of Africa and African people, then we see that there were thousands of years where race did not exist. And so we look to the time, using Jope's cradle theory, we look to the time when this began. And, you know, when we talk about patriarchy, we're not coming from a feminist perspective, which is grounded in Greece. We're not coming from that time, we're coming before Greece. And it's a time in the cradle theory, the idea is that there are two major cultures in the world today, even though there are different forms of these cultures. There are two major cultures, and they are based on the woman and the man coming together to create life and culture. And it is their power relationship that makes the difference. So in the northern cradle, well, in the southern cradle, there are two cradles, northern and southern. In the southern cradle, where humanity began, where the birth of humanity and which was African, where that began, there was a reciprocity between the woman and the man who produced life and culture. In fact, there's a great emphasis on the love of the mother and respect for the mother in that southern cradle. And all people who migrated out of Africa 70,000 years ago carried that first culture with them, those values and beliefs that come out of that reciprocity, essentially, which is ma'atik. It is ma'at. The standards of morality that the world claims to practice came from Africa and was practiced Africa-wide. So people left with that first culture. And ma'at, truth, honesty, reciprocity, justice, and so on, could not exist unless there would be an egalitarian democratic foundation for it to exist. The northern cradle, thousands of years later, evolved, and the characteristic of that is patriarchy, where the woman is dominated by the man, and it is believed that as Africans migrated to different parts of the world, we are all African, new ways of surviving and new power relations evolved. So in the northern cradle, which we look at as patriarchy, that is the origin of hierarchy and injustice and aggression, because clearly to dominate another and to justify, you have to be aggressive, you have to be a liar, you have to be a hypocrite, you have to believe in domination and aggression. And we see these types of relations across the world in the conquest, in the returning ancestors to conquer Africa, not knowing who their own ancestors were. So there's a move out of that cultural domination and justification for it to then create a global, a way of justifying domination and using melanin content in the skin as a way to define the superiority and inferiority of others. So while we have the European race construct out of those beliefs, we have the European white person, man, woman at the top, and then we've got the yellow, the red, the brown, and the black at the bottom. And they are patriarchal, as the man is perceived to be more superior to the women in all. But interestingly, at the top of the race construct, the European woman is superior to all the other men and women who have been relegated into this hierarchy or ladder of humanity. And so we look at the source as a cultural thing, and those who practice, we try to understand, move out of the race paradigm, because that is something that we can see in holy texts where the African woman, the first woman of the world, is defamed and debased and demonized because she committed some immoral act. And then later on we have the man who in the not just biblical but in the holy text, who castrated his father, and then all his children would then become enslaved to his brothers in the whole world. They are the forerunners, you know, in that particular creation story. So, you know, that begins as part of a religious idea. And then later on, about 500 years ago or so, the genetic thing came into being. So now we were seen as completely different races and unable to come together. And indeed, if we did come together, then we would be the abomination. The products, the progeny would be the abomination of the coming together of these so-called races, as you see so prevalent in India, in the Brahmin system, where the punishment is that people then become untouchable and they live lives of complete debasement and they're born into debasement because they're the progeny of these illicit, forbidden races coming together. So this is how mad the world is. And what we try to do is to say that culturally, there are people who believe in these things. And that is what the major difference is, not the fact that we're genetically different, because we're not. We're one human race. But the ideas are culturally grounded. Our culture we do not take from the European anthropology that focuses on culture, because that's hierarchicalized and racialized itself. So we don't use that model to talk about culture. We talk about it through the Jobian perspective. Job, the authentic anthropologist, who looks at culture with truth. The beginning of civilization of the world was Africa, and all the achievements, early achievements in the world were African. Africa was the teacher of the world. And from that vantage, Africology is based in recognizing these achievements before conquest and before the racialization of humanity, so that we have standards like Ma'at, for instance, that we can attribute to African people. And what we try to do in the department is to find the truth, find this knowledge, find this episteme, build it, and then in memory, reach back to connect to our cultural frame, to our cultural memory, and to use that to say who we truly are, and to try to have a cultural identity and eventually reach cultural unity. So it's the culture. So you can either follow a sick, depraved culture, or you can follow one that has the potential of good. You have those choices, and you can climb out of the race paradigm and stop looking at everybody in the way that the murderers of many people in the world have justified this depravity. sorry, I don't know how long I went on for, but I apologize if it was too long. But that's what the book is grounded in. It's an anthropological book.
Yeah. I just wanted to just add one comment, because
Yeah.
this really, you did a really beautiful job of really telling the audience what our book is like. One of the things we did in the book is to talk about some of the characteristics of the house of race, as opposed to the how, as we saw it, the house of humanity. And race gives you this notion, as Dr. Dove has said, of patriarchy, white supremacy, hierarchy of races, the hierarchy of gender, the highlighting of alterity. This is why you see so many studies done on the other, weaponizing of physical traits, the assertion of an Anglo-Germanic or Aryan superiority, belief that race is approved by nature and the deities, a toxic relationship with other people, self-centered greed, exploitation of non-white people, and many times deceitful interactions. The house of humanity, on the other hand, starts with Homo sapiens. We're all Homo sapiens, and that our commonalities outweigh our differences, and that we accept difference, that the acceptance of difference without ranking human beings is the key to the development of dignity and the respect for life, and the honoring of the notion of being human. Humility when you face difference, cooperation over competition. These are some of the concepts that we see as important to trying to understand the differences in terms of what we are saying. And the George Floyd murder, as not mentioned, was one of the activating ideas behind us writing this book, because what basically occurred for everybody to see was that the police officers did not consider George Floyd as a human being in the same way that they saw themselves. And I think that's where we can now start answering any questions that you have.
Let me just say thank you very much, Dr. Asante, Dr. Dove. You always inspire us and give us a lot of food for thought. I'm going to pass it over now to Amy, who's going to present the questions. But thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you both very much, Dr. Dove and Dr. Asante. And I'm going to pass over to questions. So if anyone wants to put their questions in the chat, and I've also got a couple of questions as well that we could start with. So as you kind of both mentioned, to my understanding, this kind of idea of Afrocentricity and this kind of race paradigm is this acknowledgement that we are kind of all human, and we need to kind of acknowledge this whole human experience for all of us. I was just wondering if you could speak about maybe how this relates to anti-racism work or kind of racial justice work. Obviously, you mentioned kind of the murder of George Floyd, and if there's some kind of connections there that you can maybe speak about.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, okay, I'm unmuted. Yes, thank you very much. If I would love to take that question. The way that Afrocentricity relates to this whole question of anti-racism is that anti-racism, as we know, is this illusion. Rather, race itself is an illusion, but racism itself does exist because there are people who actually believe in the different races, and there are people who have hierarchized these different racial groupings. And so consequently, their practice, their action is to operate on the basis of this ideology that one race is elevated against another race. So you have to fight that at the level of where it is practiced. And we are all in for fighting against the notion of racism as it exists within the society. One way of dealing with that is, we say, this illusion that you have about the fact that people are different and that you can have this hierarchy. If you stop killing Black people because of their complexion, you stop killing people because of their religion or their gender, if you stop divesting Black people of economic power, stop disempowering people because of so-called race, caste, gender, or religion, stop police brutality, security forces, and politicians who trade in racial rhetoric. All these things are attacks on this illusion of racism, of race rather, the illusion of race, but it's an attack on racism. So we don't believe that you can dismiss the notion of anti-racism as it is practiced in Western society. It has to be attacked, but but ultimately, the aim is not the creation of race itself as a fact. The aim is to show people who believe in these various rankings and hierarchy that human beings really represent the best form of what Afrocentricity is about. Afrocentricity is not about and this is one of the things, by the way, that when we first created Afrocentricity, there were people saying, oh, this is just Black people are just trying to replace Eurocentricity with Afrocentricity. I said, no, that's a misunderstanding. Eurocentricity has become, because it valorizes the ranking of white people above other people, it has promoted itself as a universal idea, and is therefore a idea that exploits all other people. Afrocentricity has no aim or ambition of becoming a system that exploits people who are not of African origin, because we see all humans as being of African origin. We deal with fighting domination. We deal with fighting oppression. Those things we can fight against. Those are real serious things. But we cannot make an assumption just by people's complexion or color or gender, any basis of cultural values. I mean, I always like to use the example of Clarence Thomas. I mean, he looks like a Black man, and he is the Supreme Court Justice in the United States of America, but his culture is not the African culture that we're talking about as Afrocentrists. When we're talking about Afrocentricity, we're talking about moving toward Ma'aticity, those values that are fundamental and were fundamental to Homo sapiens at the very beginning of human history.
Thank you so much for that dialogue, Dr. Asante. And you actually went into this next question, but maybe you can elaborate more. This question is from Ezra Hussein. And the question is, how can we unrank humans now? Is that a next step? How would that look? And is it even possible?
It's absolutely possible. Nothing happens overnight, and the people who come out of Africology and think this way are very few. So it's about creating the environment where we can begin to address how culture informs and creates all institutions. So every institution is shaped and formed by the culture that defines it, the dominant culture that defines it. And so we find in the West, well, not only in the West, but we find that the institutions, whether it's healthcare, whether it's religion, whether it's politics, whether it's economics, whether it's education, for example, that these institutions purvey the ideas of the conquerors to the oppressed. And so when we work in any of these institutions, we are possibly unwittingly maintaining that cultural environment where, say, mothers can go into hospital and Black mothers can have a much higher rate of their deaths and their children's deaths than other people who go into hospital. You can go into religious environments and learn that Black people are inferior, all these types of places. But once you know, once you understand that culture defines them, creates the minds, shapes the mind, and the mind shapes culture, when you understand that race is not real, and of course we're dealing with racism, which is massive, that the beginning of the change, the beginning of a new vision, the beginning of something different can begin to take place. Otherwise, we're always inside the race paradigm and maintaining it. So the thing is, to whatever work that we are doing, that we would make the change. We have to exist in this world. We can't just go off to an island somewhere. So whatever work we're in, we are charged with the responsibility of bringing truth into that situation and making plans, however small they may be, to make the changes for now. It's not, we can't rise up, kill everybody, take over, as some people believe, you know, not us necessarily, but that is a strong belief in the Eurocentric and Arab-centric culture. You know, it's a change of mind, because the mind is the battlefield. That is the real battlefield. And it's not easier to carry on with how things are. And it's ridiculous to challenge how things could be. It's the mind that holds the vision of a different kind of future. So it's not a question of wiping everything out. We can build our own institutions. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that we do that. So we can do that. And also, we're part of the dominant cultural institutions, and we make those changes there. We do that. This is a historical fact. America today, the conquest of the First Nations people was diabolical. It's not in history. We don't know about it. Children are taught all these lies purposefully so that we don't know who we are. But we're in a place where the move towards democracy, which really is another term for my art, in an alien culture, the move towards it has been done through the movement of Black people challenging everything that exists there. And that is how change has occurred. So it is already happening. You know, that's what we do. Even our department is under challenge, where we're threatened all the time. It's almost impossible to get new professors, and if we do, you know, they may be thrown out at any moment. This is the world that we live in, the reality that we live in, but still we move forward to make the change. That's our responsibility, because we know the history, we know the past, we know we were the teachers, we know that we created amazing civilizations, we know that we wanted peace, we know that we wanted balance, you know, and what we're in now, it challenges African Black humanity, so that every single hierarchy, whether it be class, whether it be gender, whether it be sexuality, the Blackest people inside these hierarchies are the ones whose lives are threatened. Many are killed, you know. But we look at class as if it's about the working people, but the Black people at the bottom. We look at gender as if it's all about women, but the Black women at the bottom, and it's the darkest skinned people, These are the people under threat. We look at sexuality. It's not just about sex. The blackest people at the bottom of this hierarchy are killed. You know, all these things. This is why we believe in fighting oppression. It's just wrong from an Afrocentric perspective.
Beautiful. Well said. I mean, we can, just say, embrace humanity, embrace the commonality of opportunity and possibility, embrace the beauty of diversity, embrace the African origin of humanity, embrace all colors and complexions of humans as equal, embrace a common quest for cultural pluralism, and embrace cultural differences as part of the human rainbow. That's Afrocentricity. That's what it is. It's not and if we can get out of the other discourse of talking about race and advance this is an advancement of an African idea that comes from the very beginning of human history. That is the African ideology.
Yeah, and it's about respecting our ancestors. How many people respect their African ancestors? How many people in all these different religions have been forbidden to respect their ancestors? You know, it's got to be looked at. You know, our connection is to our ancestors. They have given us what we've come to now. And in loving our ancestors, it's only those good people who came into the world and did something good and produced something good and helped the world. These are when we talk about ancestors, we're not talking about the crazy people who came in and did the damage. We're talking about the people who progressed us, who helped us, who loved us. We remember them. That's why they become ancestors. But there are many places where if you say ancestor, people start worrying that, you know, some things you're not quite right. And it's very religious as well. So all the modern religions have issues against ancestors, and quite rightly so, because, you know, if you come to know your ancestors and what they've done, you connect to that spiritual side of humanity, that cultural side of humanity, and people don't want that. Certain people, controllers, don't want that.
Yeah.
Thank you both for that historical context and kind of talking about communing with your ancestors. I don't know, that feels really special to me. But yeah, we'll move on to the next question now, which is from Tatora Mukushi, who says, Dr. Dove, is it possible to have a distilling of a description of white culture, i.e. the culture of those that emigrated from Africa and developed the racist culture? And they said, I guess by implication, the same question applies to Black culture.
Well, that's a book, several books, volumes, but from our position currently, and simply put, we just put these type of differences to environmental differences that occurred, which created the ideas of self-individualism, the need to to survive, those types of ideas, anthropological ideas. We look at that for changes in the way that culture, the human culture has, the changes that have been made. You know, we can look at culture from beginning with Africa, and we can look at how they have changed. This is what we're doing. So in terms of European culture, white supremacy is a doctrine within that culture. And we know that the ancient, the African people went across the whole world and settled in the whole world. And it's not that far back in the UK that you can go to Black ancestors and African ancestors. You've got Cheddar Man there to give you a wonderful example of what original Europeans look like. But, the European culture has a very central to it is this white supremacist doctrine. And whilst, and it's good to know, and one must know that not all people are white supremacists that practice European culture, that are engaged in European culture. But nonetheless, white supremacy has privileged all light-skinned people like myself. And if we don't understand that and we think that we are something special, it's rubbish. That's part of the race paradigm, and that is part of white supremacy. And we inside the African community, we also practice that. In America, we call it colorism, and we place the lighter skinned person at the top with the bad hair or the good hair, whatever we say about each other, and the blackest skinned person at the bottom. What we're doing, we've had the cultural imposition in our minds, and we are practicing the conqueror's ideas, values, and beliefs amongst ourselves. Well, that's not our origin. That is not our cultural makeup. We have over time subscribed to it, because when you go to school, that's all you learn. Everywhere you go, every film, every piece of paper that you read, every book almost is confirming and affirming this cultural imposition, so that in a European setting, those people who are not guilty of it but have been privileged by it need to know that they are privileged by it, but also they can more easily make their connection to their African ancestors, because there are always attempts by those people to change things for the better. There's plenty of evidence in that there is, and in fact they're closer to their African ancestors in having sort of socialistic type ideas and things like that that they try to develop, so it's white supremacy privileges white people, light-skinned people, it does that. That's real, that's racism. But we have to be cognizant that we are being imposed upon, colonized. We have to get to know that. And without knowledge, how can we? That's why, those of us privileged in the academic world, our mission is to get the knowledge to people. And create and find it and put it out there. And of course we'll be hated and derided and thought, oh, how can you ridiculously think that, but that is part of the struggle.
That's right. Excellent. I have nothing to say.
Well, I hope I've answered the question, because I tend to go off on a tangent, but I hope it helps.
Yeah.
It was amazing. We have another question from Dada Olorofenmi, who actually is a graduate student here at the University of Delaware. And he's also my TA. So I'm happy to see he's here. Yes. Olorofenmi, he states that he appreciates your insight and research. This is a great presentation. His question: how can we approach, deconstruct, and resist religious traditions that promote racism, discrimination, and white superiority over Blacks?
Wow. Well, that's a big question. It's a really big question. And that's part Boy, that's a big question, and it's a dangerous question, but we never back away from dangers. So let me see if I can at least talk a little bit to Olarume's point. Deeply embedded in most religious traditions that we know that are particularly Western and even some that are Asian, is this whole color notion. This is why, for example, even in the Hindu religion, you have these caste system, the Varnas, and you have the Brahmins at the top and the Sudras at the bottom, and then you have the Dalits, as they call them, the people who have no caste because of many different issues that have been developed. But this is a religious idea. It's not a natural idea, but if it's established as a religious idea, that means people practice it. I mean, in the United States, for example, now there are states like California that are outlawing the caste system because there are students at the University of California who wouldn't eat with other students because they're from different castes, even though they're all from India. So this is a problem. It's a problem because their religion says one thing, but the social structure of a progressive state like California says another thing, that you cannot discriminate. You can't say, I'm not going to eat with this person or eat food with it, because in California, there is this notion of equality of human beings. So that's a religious thing. But in Islam, you also have the same thing, because in Islam, you get the notion, for example, that there are some people, particularly if they're African people, who may very well, the origin is, there's an enslavement notion here. And the word Sudan, for example, means land of the slaves, basically. That's what it means. And so this is why now some Sudanese, and I have my maternal mitochondrial origin in Sudan, while we're not using the word Sudan, but using the word Nubia. We're saying Nubia because Sudan is an Arabic word that means the land of the slaves, you see? So that, but it's a religious thing as well. It's how you treat people from different complexions and so forth. In the Christian and the Jewish religion, you have these notions of the children of Noah and and Ham and so forth, and the children of Ham and so forth. And so all of these, and these were the black ones supposedly, and they're treated in a certain way. All of this stuff serves to create a notion of racial hierarchy and of color hierarchy. Now, of course, we don't find this in any, I don't know any African traditional religion where this is practiced. I don't know it in Yoruba, I don't know it in Shona, I don't know it in Zulu, and I don't know it in Akan. These are the four basic traditions I do have some knowledge of. You don't have this ranking by color and that kind of thing, even though people are different. Some people are tall, some people are short, some are lighter complexion than others, but you don't have it. But it comes out of, I guess, the Judeo Christian or Abrahamic religions, as well as the Hindu religion. So I think the way we deal with it is we confront it wherever we see it, and we try to break it down and teach people we are all Homo sapiens. We all come from African origin. And before 70,000 years ago, everybody in the world was Black. There was no other people. We had not yet migrated out of the continent of Africa. So most of the lives of Homo sapiens, most of the time was spent on the continent of Africa.
And that's where the early sciences were developed that have influenced modern sciences. They had them, they knew the stars, the sun, the movement of the planets thousands of years even before Kemet. And we use Kemet or ancient Egypt as a point
Right.
of reference, because there's so much evidence of what people wrote and thought and built, and so we can use that. But we know that across Africa-wide, there's evidence of people understanding science, which obviously was codified, science, religion, so on, writing was codified in Kemet, but it didn't originate in Kemet. And that's one of the things that, say, Egyptologists tried to do, is sort of carve it out of Africa into the arms of, into their arms, when it's clearly, from a logical standpoint, and from all the evidence, it's African and based on African knowledge that came before. But what we have to be aware of now is that we're all primed, psychological word, to believe in evolution. And so that construct there really affects how we see ourselves, because sometimes we'll focus on Kemet as if here we are civilized, without thinking about all the people that came before that who've been considered to be inhuman and subhuman and so on. It's all rubbish, but our job is to really look at these things and turn that evolutionist thing into something else, because clearly, if evolution was true, why would African people have created all these amazing civilizations at a time when African people were supposed to be subhuman? It doesn't make any sense. And in fact, we're moving away from some of the values and beliefs of our ancients, which are far more progressive than the rubbish that we're doing today. We're coming away from that. So for African people to consider evolution as if it's a real thing is a kind of madness, and we have to be very careful, to step very carefully into that terrain, because our job, part of our job is to get rid of that. It affects it's all part of that cultural thing. Not true.
Thank you both.
so much. I do just want to say we have we're approaching about 20 questions left. So please just let us know when you would like to take the last couple.
Yeah, I have about 10 minutes.
Okay. So
Okay, so
everyone, if we
many
don't get to
as
your
we
question,
can.
we're so sorry. We can send them to Drs. Asante and Dove, and we can probably post their responses to your question online. Okay, so Amy, would you like to take the next one?
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is from Dr. Rita Walters, who says, what suggestions/strategies would you recommend to get institutions, specifically predominantly white institutions, to embrace an African-centered perspective, seeing themselves individually and collectively as one human origin, striving to eradicate racism?
I think it's going to certainly take some persuasion, but I think it can be done. We have to, the best way is to educate people about the true and authentic history of the world. If you give people an authentic history, they will begin to understand. I teach some graduate students and have seen many of them come awake when you tell them that we don't need to start with Homer and the Odyssey and the Iliad. Let's go back and start with Imhotep and the pyramid. And once we do that, and we start from the pyramid, and we show them by chronology where humans are in a certain time and place, is entirely awakening. I think so education is a key to that. Next question.
Thank you so much. This next question is from Zachary Williams. First, Zachary says, thank you, Drs. Asante and Dove, for blessing us with your work in this incredible book. White supremacy being discussed and unmasked on an unprecedented level globally. The question, what message does your work, Afrocentricity, have to root out white supremacy once and for all, especially pertaining to national and ethnic political crises all over the world?
Well, I think that one of the ways that we have to root it out is we have to confront it. First of all, I think part of the issue in terms of African people is that we have often not been able to confront these realities with our own intellectual ideas. And that's a big problem. Throughout the continent of Africa, what you see is that we use Eurocentric theories, meta-theories, paradigms, in order to try to deal with the issues that Eurocentrism brings to the world. You can't do that. You've got to ask yourself the question, what comes out of the historical narratives of African people? How do we interrogate things? Take, for example, the concept of beauty. What is the concept of beauty in African tradition? How is it defined? And most often it is defined in African languages as beauty is as beauty does. In other words, I mean, being beautiful means being good. It's the same thing. So that's not a Western concept, you see? So you've got to interrogate African history and culture, find out what the sages thought, the men and women of Africa thought about these things before you can confront. And then you're able to bring them, and this will help us root out white supremacy. But we have to remember that the rooting out of white supremacy means rooting it out in our own heads, because we also have it, you see?
Yeah. And also in terms of the institutions that Dr. Asante was alluding to that are built all over Africa, all the conquerors have placed their institutions with their cultural values and beliefs, governments, economics, healthcare, religions, and all that's all in Africa. And you know, so the northern part is the Arabized part of Africa, and the southern part, the Europeanized part of it. And you know, right now there are places in Africa where people are enslaved today, and it seems to be an African thing. Well, it's an African thing because people are in Africa and it's happening there, but it's actually an Arab thing that is practiced openly, has been for thousands of years, even before Europeans went and did their damage there. And so what we often look at is the European sort of institutional program, where, you know, places like France earn billions every second almost, in all the places they've conquered, even though they're not there. It's their money, and it's the same across the rest of Africa, but we never look at the north and all the Arabized countries, you know, because some of us blackish skinned people are practicing anti-African, anti-black values and beliefs, accepting in enslavement, accepting that it's a great honor as a man to be you know, castrated, which means that you cannot produce anymore. But it seems to be such a high honor in the Arabic world. We're convinced of this, you know, because of this mind thing, the cultural imposition, but they are rooted in the institutions that are there. So there's some call, one could say, to develop our own institutions, and indeed that goes on in the UK and France and the US and so on, for the children at times, the schools and so on, and different areas of social needs. you know, people culturally impose their cultural thing to love African humanity so lives can be saved, you know, but it's a big thing in Africa, but a lot of it is undercover as well, so that people are still practicing the ancient traditions, but secretly, because they'll be killed if they reveal that they are, because that's the nature of the imposition, is murder and death, you know. So, but it is there, and it's something that we must always be working on. Wherever we are, we have to be working on that change and believe in it. Dr. Asante says victorious consciousness, and that's what we have to have.
Thank you both so much. We're actually gonna allow that to be the last question. I do want to say that I have created a Google Doc and I will share that with you, and then NCBS will post it to our website along with the recording. So if your question did not get asked live, please know that we will give it to our amazing panelists and they will answer your questions. At this time, on behalf of NCBS and our president, Dr. Valerie Graham, who is here present, she texted me, she wanted me to let you know that she's here. She's in the meeting, but she's listening to your amazing presentation while she's in her meeting. And I even seen her participate in the chat. And of course, I do want to say, please make sure to everyone watching that you register for our conference next year in San Jose. Please renew your membership so that way we can have these lively discussions in person, right, with these great panelists. I'm sure they will be there as well. So at this time, I would love to turn the floor back over, or our virtual floor back over, to Jeanette and to Amy for our closing remarks. Again, thank you, and we appreciate you on behalf of the National Council for Black Studies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just wanted to say what an absolute privilege it's been to hear from Dr. Asante and Dr. Dove. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. It's been a real pleasure to listen to you and have a chance to engage with you both for this hour. Thank you as well to Dr. Jeanette Davidson, Dr. Alicia Fontanet, and the National Council for Black Studies for your continued support for Scotland's Black History Month. It's really great to have a chance to kind of chat with you guys and kind of share these transnational kind of ideas during this month. And thank you to everyone for giving up some of your Friday to come to this event. Just to say as well, if you'd like to find out about any more events that are going on for Black History Month in Scotland, you can go to our website, which is just blackhistorymonthscotland.org, and you'll see the full programme of events. It's been a real pleasure to be here, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I don't know if Jeanette, you wanted to say any final words, but
You're on mute.
yes,
You're
you're on mute.
I wasn't planning on it, but obviously this has been just wonderful. I thank our speakers. I thank Dr. Fontanet and Amy. Thank our audience. I thank our audience for wonderful questions. And it's just all good. I am just delighted. It's always an honor to be involved in this kind of program with you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, and it will be posted on NCBS's website and social media. Have a good night, good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
It's a
you.
good night in Scotland, right?
Yes,
Yes, a good night in Scotland.
Scotland.
All right, you all have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.